It is our understanding that this territory is included in the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations. So as a first generation migrant to this land and as the outgoing president of the union, I would like to thank our true hosts on these lands and commit our union towards anti-colonial principles in our advocacy work on campus. Settler colonialism from Turtle Island to Palestine dispossesses the indigenous right to land and life through violence. Today, as we get together in solidarity with our Palestinian siblings, PSAC 901 would like to start by firmly saying that this is an event for those who wish to learn honestly about the Palestinian cause and movement, to express our care and support, and to move forward in solidarity. We will have attendees from across nationalities and religions today, and we will not tolerate any comments or interventions that are Islamophobic, xenophobic, or anti-Semitic in nature. We take the lead and learn from the solidarity practices of many Muslim and Jewish undergraduate students at Queen's campus who organized together against colonialism, be it here on Turtle Island or in Palestine. Finally, to add, we take the lead from organizations such as IJV or Independent Jewish Voices in understanding and fighting anti-Semitism, and do not recognize the IHRA working definition. For this meeting, I would like to identify myself as the anti-harassment resource person. You may reach me at president@psac901.org. Thank you, and over to you, Prerna.
All right. Hi, everyone. So just before I speak, I want all of you to look at the chat, and I'm going to upload a picture, which can be a profile picture for throughout the event. And yeah, it will load. I think it is loaded. So yeah, you can do that. And right. And we are, and just to tell everyone that we are live on Facebook from PSAC 901's page. So PSAC 901 is really happy to facilitate this event in recognition of the need of labor solidarity with Palestinian liberation. We, alongside some other unions in Canada, stand uncompromisingly for Palestinian liberation and for Palestinian human rights. In addition to the dispossession of Palestinian right to land, we have also seen with the recent general strike that the settler economy of Israel reflects how Israel sustains itself on the exploitation of Palestinian workers. We recognize how Zionism and the warfare economy is aided and abetted by imperialist nations such as Canada. The Palestinian struggle is also not just another issue for labor, precisely because Israel functions as the vehicle for US strategy to further its global capitalist wings in non-Western regions, and does so with the complicity of Canada, whose integration in US imperialist foreign policy is very clear, with billions spent on arms sale. Palestinian rights are absolutely a central issue for labor, and we are very happy to facilitate this conversation with SPHR and MSGP today. Lubna, a student in cultural studies and a Palestinian artist curator, will speak on tricontinental solidarity and resistance. And Maysam, a crucial part of Palestinian youth movement in Toronto, also an ex-student of Queen's University, will speak about her poetic and political organizing. And Professor Salzmann will shed light on certain myth-busting ideas around Palestine and Canadian complicity with the Israel-US nexus, as we know it. So we will be taking Q&As in the chat after the speakers are done speaking. So even if you can have questions, you can put it in the chat right now, but we will be taking it later after the speakers are done their bit. So over to you, Lubna, take it away.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk. So before I start my presentation, I just want to say that today we are witnessing a new cultural and a new solidarity moment with the Palestinians. And we should all recognize that what led us for today's movement, or for today's growing culture of solidarity, is the recent events that happened in Palestine, from starting the illegal evictions of Sheikh Jarrah, the Palestinian neighborhood in East Jerusalem, to several attacks against worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque, and brutal attacks by the Israeli police against unarmed Palestinian protesters mainly in Jerusalem. After these escalations, of course, Hamas, the Palestinian militant group in Gaza, they warned about attacking the Israelis if they continued these policies, which they did, and this also led us to this atrocious war against the Gaza Strip, which led to more than 200 people to be killed, mostly children and women and other people. My main conversation, or what I will be talking about, is mainly this culture of solidarity and the Palestinian narrative, basically, if or not Palestinians have or ever had permission to narrate. In 1948, Edward Said, Palestinian intellectual, wrote in his book Permission to Narrate that Palestinians or with respect to the dominant discourse about Palestine, facts never or hardly ever spoke for themselves, especially in North America, where Israeli and Zionist propaganda seems to lead a life of its own. This is unfortunately true back then and is still true until today, especially that the Zionist propaganda is taking over most of the mainstream media channels, and also by practicing other legislations against journalists and writers and people who are trying to cover stories from Palestine. This is also true in the case of the academia, most academic institutions in North America, where Palestinian discourse or anything regarding to Palestinian discourse is attacked or is labeled by being anti-Semitic or and equating, of course, anti-Zionism with anti-Semitic, which has been growing more and more in North America and in Europe recently. As for journalists who wish to cover Palestine, usually international journalists, they are recruited by Israeli intelligence before even entering the West Bank, especially before entering the Gaza Strip, just to make sure that whatever they are covering will be in line with what the Israeli media and the Israeli propaganda wants them to cover. According to Noam Chomsky, of course, he's a very leading Jewish intellectual in the United States. He also argued that anti-Semitism grew to have two different meanings. Before, it was anti-Semitism was the organizational or organized violence against Jewish people for being Jewish. Now it became or more associated with any criticism against the state of Israel or any the state of Israel policies. And anyone who dare to speak about Israel and what Israel is doing to the Palestinians is immediately marked with this mark, anti-Semitic. As for Jewish people who are speaking out more and more now, they are labeled with another label, which is self-hating Jews. And this just as an attempt to shut any voice growing against what Israel is doing against the Palestinians. Palestinians, of course, have tried resistance in several ways. This include in the 1970s when the PLO, or the Palestinian Liberation Organization, was established as an attempt to establish guerrilla warfare as an attempt to liberate Palestine and to liberate Palestinians. And this movement was also faced with a huge amount of violence especially when the PLO was in Lebanon, where Israel basically carried war against Lebanon and bombed Beirut, the capital city, to the ground, carrying multiple assassinations, not just against militant or political leaders, but especially against artists, writers, journals, and any kind of intellectuals. This was not only done in Beirut or in Lebanon or in Palestine. This was also done in Europe. For example, in 1980, I think it's 1986, where Najil Ali, one of the most famous Palestinian caricaturists, was assassinated in London, UK. Okay. After the PLO left Beirut, the Palestinian Liberation left Beirut, and armed resistance was no longer really an option, especially that they were located to North Africa, especially in Tunisia. Palestinians have tried to create new forms of resistance, including civil disobedience, which was the case in the first Intifada. Basically, in the first Intifada, Palestinians were refusing the military control against them, and all of the hostility of the Israeli military control against Palestinian communities. So basically, civil disobedience was meant for them not paying taxes or boycotting Israeli products, and this was also faced with so many hostility and so many killings and so many deaths. In 1994, when Yasser Arafat and the PLO decided to go with the peace agreement, which is Oslo, and the main agreement was to have the PLO as the legitimate representative for Palestinians in Palestine, and this also allowed for a few members of the PLO to come back to Palestine. While this was true, Israel continued to practice settler-colonialism and to take more and more land from the West Bank and turning them into illegal Israeli settlements. And now Israel has control over more than 70% of the West Bank, dividing cities between themselves, dividing villages, and of course, exposing Palestinians to all the hostilities that can happen on checkpoints, which are around 500 checkpoints in the West Bank. Later on, when the second Intifada happened, also as an attempt to speak out against the Israeli hostility and the Israeli policies, it also started as peaceful protests across the West Bank, across the Gaza Strip, and which was also faced with more and more hostility. More than 7,000 people were killed during the second Intifada. Among them, family members of mine also. So this also leads us to where we are today. In 2007, Palestinians were able to conduct one of the rarest completely democratic elections in the Middle East. And in that elections, the Palestinians chose Hamas to be their representative. And of course, the US and the European Union, they practiced sanctions against the Palestinian government in order to end this election, or to end the results of this election, which also led us to the situation where we are today, where Hamas is controlling the Gaza Strip, and the PLO is controlling, and democratically is controlling the West Bank. And this also was the starting point to carry all assaults once and again against the Gaza Strip. In 2008, around 1,000 civilian people were killed in the Gaza in the Israeli assault. In 2014, 2,300 people got killed in the 2014 Israeli assault against Gaza. And in the assault that is happening, or now I guess now there is a ceasefire, but nobody knows really where this is leading us. But so far, 240 people got killed, and most of them are children and women. For such a long time, the main discourse in the Western media and among Western politicians is that Israel has the right to defend itself. But never is the case to talk about the Palestinians' right to exist or even to survive these assaults that are carried again and again by the Israeli government and by the Israeli army. It's time for us to call the situation as it is. Israel is a war criminal. It is practicing ethnic cleansing. It is practicing apartheid against the Palestinians, and it has been so for too long a state above the international law. And so this was the main my main argument. But before I end my presentation, I just wanted to share a few pictures that I actually took from my last trip to Palestine, just to give you an idea of what an apartheid looks like in Palestine today. So I took this picture near Bethlehem. It is a checkpoint that's on a checkpoint that separates Bethlehem from Jerusalem, and it states that this road leads to an A area, which is the area that is controlled by the Palestinian Authority. And any Israeli is prohibited to come in, and claiming that it would be dangerous for them, but also claiming that it would be an assault, it would be an illegal action or an assault against the state. Another picture that I also wanted to share is a picture from my own hometown. Okay, yeah, this one. So this is a picture from my own hometown, Khalil or Hebron. And in Hebron, Hebron is the only city in the West Bank that has an illegal Israeli settlement inside the city and not surrounding it. And this settlement is basically 400 settlers who live there illegally, with 2,000 soldiers to protect them. And they created this, they basically closed one street from the beginning to the end, and only allowing Israelis to live or to even pass by the streets. And of course, all Palestinians who owned houses or owned businesses in that street, they lost the right to access their places. This includes the first shoe factory that my dad started in the 1980s, and later after the Second Intifada, he completely lost any access to his own shoe factory, to his own business. And so this basically at one end of the street, this is a pharmacy, and it also belonged to one of my friends' grandfather. And here is a separation wall. Beyond this, it's the Israeli settlement. And beyond this fence starts a Palestinian area, which is the downtown of Hebron, one of the most crowded areas in the city. So I just wanted to show you these pictures to give you an idea of what an apartheid means and how apartheid really looks like. And it's time for us to stand against it, especially here in Canada, where still the Canadian government is repeating the same lie that Israel has the right to protect themselves, and to change this into, does the Palestinians have the right to live and to survive? So thank you so much for listening.
Maysam, you can take it away from here. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Prerna. I just want to say thank you so much to Lubna for giving us the best context you could give, I think, when it comes to resistance efforts of our people, and for sharing parts of your own lived experience. MashaAllah alayki, like it's very, very well appreciated. I do want to say Assalamu alaikum. My name is Maysam. My pronouns are she, her. I will be, maybe breaking a little bit of formalities today with y'all, if that's okay, because of the place that I'm at with everything that's happening. And I will talk about that within my 15 minutes of spotlight. I am a very, very young organizer. I do want to recognize that. And a lot of the teachings that I've learned and some of the things that some of the sentiments that I'm sharing today is all thanks to many of the indigenous knowledge carriers, Black organizers, Palestinian elders within my community who have taught me how to be an organizer, what revolution means, what liberation should look like, and how we should create liberation, how we should create what we want to see in a liberated Palestine and a liberated world in what we do today. I have been a student at Queen's for the past 5 years. I've been a part of the Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights group for 4 years, and I have a lot to say about that. And we've done a lot of joint struggle work with community groups in Gadarakwi or the Kingston area, one of which I want to shout out is Idle No More Kingston, and some of my friends there. I'm also a part of the PYM, which is the Palestinian Youth Movement. It's a transnational organization that sets to mobilize young Arabs and young Palestinian youth to take control of our narrative. And I'll talk more about that in depth for the next question. And then also, I want to say that I'm also a poet. And with poetry, I believe that everything is political. And so poetry without politics, like I believe Christos had stated in a quote once, poetry without politics is meaningless to us because we are unable to create a world where we are able to find a safe space to hide away from the brutality, because the brutality is everywhere. And we're seeing that right now in the case of Palestine. And then I'd like to say that today I'm speaking from an immense amount of pain and inshallah hope. My whole being is in pain and has been in pain. My people have not gotten the time to mourn the deaths of people back home, of our martyrs, some of which are close loved ones and families, family friends and family members. And so I just want to state that here, that this is true for many Palestinians right now in the diaspora. And we haven't had time to mourn because we're too busy organizing and mobilizing right now. We're too busy educating people who should already know what's happening to our people. So I just want to make that reminder. And before I jump into the 3 topics that I was asked to speak about today, I'd like to say a big thank you to Professor Trish Salah. Professor Trish Salah was one of the only faculty members at Queen's who dedicated so much time to helping me explore my politics and learn about Palestine and learn about what it means to be Palestinian. She did a directed reading course with me and out of her own time. And so I just want to say a big thanks to her because she showed me how my love for art and poetry could come in together with revolution and liberation. So the 3 questions that I was asked to speak about today, the first one is about the Palestinian youth movement, how I found it, what its goals are, how do they mobilize, and how you all could support the Palestinian youth movement. The Palestinian youth movement was started to put power and ownership again into the hands of Palestinian youth to determine our own futures. It was in reaction, obviously, to the Oslo Accords in 1993, which in many of our opinions have co-opted grassroots resistance and have allowed for the co-optation of neoliberal policies within Palestine that have halted and hindered our resistance efforts towards liberation. We are a transnational, independent grassroots movement of young Palestinians in Palestine and in exile worldwide. We also include other non-Palestinian Arab youth. And I want to say that for myself, I got involved because of my own history of displacement. My family, my grandfather's generation was ethnically cleansed in 1948 during the Nakba. If you don't know what the Nakba is, now is your time to learn and research. And I just want to say our vision in the PYM is a struggle towards the end of the occupation, apartheid policies, and settler-colonial expansion, which we are seeing happening at this moment right now. In addition, our struggle is inherently connected to many collective liberation struggles across the globe. We do a lot of joint struggle work, and we see so much inherent value in that work as young Palestinian youth. And I will talk more about that in just a moment. The second question that I was asked to speak about was about the future of this movement. What forms of solidarities are important? How do we keep centering the narrative of Palestinians over competing and conflicting ones? I have a lot to say, and I'm not going to mince my words. The first thing I want to say is that the ceasefire is bullcrap. We have lost way too many martyrs that we have not had the time to mourn, as I said before. Lubna did a beautiful job doing an overview of the situation in Gaza and the over 200 martyrs that we have lost. A ceasefire means nothing. Israel has an ego, and Israel is not going to let go of this. We need to be steadfast in our resistance, and I mean steadfast according to Palestinian teachings, traditional teachings of what it means to be steadfast. We need to maintain this mobilization in this period. I want to say that Sheikh Jarrah is not a closed topic. Sheikh Jarrah, if you don't know, is a neighborhood in Jerusalem, and they're currently facing not evictions. We don't use the language of evictions. Evictions is the language of the colonizer, and they're using the language of evictions according to their settler-colonial courts. This is not an eviction, this is ethnic cleansing. This is what we experienced in 1948, and we are seeing it happening in real time. If you don't know who Muhammad al-Kurd is, now is your time to follow him on all social medias, because he is on the ground currently as it stands, documenting everything that's happening alongside his sister and his family. I want to say that there are lynchings happening all across historic Palestine towards Palestinians. There's still attacks on Al-Aqsa, as we saw today, after the so-called ceasefire was announced. We've had the siege on Gaza for almost 15 years. And now's the time that we say enough. We do not hold back. We should not mince our words. If you are not doing everything in your power right now and your capacity right now to understand the urgency of this moment and to speak out against the genocide of my people, you are complicit. And if you look back decades from now, when Palestine is free, inshallah, ya Rab, you will be so ashamed of yourself for not doing everything in your power to speak out on what's happening in Palestine. Right now, we're seeing a paradigm shift, as Lubna alluded to and talked about in depth. We are resisting the core of the Israeli settler-colonial regime and nothing more. And this time it's different. I refuse for this time to be co-opted again by our bourgeoisie Palestinians, by the Israeli Authority, by the US. No one is co-opting this time. We're not going to let this happen. We're not going to let what happened during the first Intifada happen again. And I want to highlight that during the first Intifada, women were the backbone of the movement. And women and femme and queer, trans Palestinians continue to be the backbone of this movement. And I'm seeing that in my own firsthand experiences today, organizing in Toronto. I want to say there's there's an immense amount of misogyny that needs to be shut down immediately if we want to see a free Palestine. We need to practice, as I said, we need to practice the values and the ethics of care that we would like to see in a liberated world, and I'm not seeing that today. So this is a call out to you if you are a cis hetero Arab man, that you need to do better for the femme, for the queer trans Palestinians who are around you, who are doing this work. I want to say that we can be possibly seeing the end of apartheid in our actions in our lifetime. And we need to answer the voice of the people. The people are angry. The people are enraged, and they have every single right to be. And I want to say that our calls to action need to answer their calls to mobilization. And I just want to share a small anecdote from what I experienced organizing the rally in Toronto during Nakba Day on May 15th. Initially, we had planned for a simple projector rally because of COVID restrictions, meaning we were just going to have projections in various places across the city. But because of the escalations, because of the anger of the people, because people were pushing us, we answered their call, and 13,000 people showed up in Nathan Phillips Square in Toronto. 13,000 people. And we didn't even do the little projections. So if that's not a lesson for how we should all be answering the calls of Palestinians, of our community, who have every right to be enraged right now, then I don't know what is. I want to say that respectability is not the revolution. We should not cease to appease the masses at this point in time. We can name everything as it is: genocide, apartheid, settler colonialism, ethnic cleansing, land theft, lynching, the killing of children, innocent children. Respectability is not the revolution. And we need to make economic disruptions wherever we are. We need to disrupt the society that we are in. We need to take notes from our indigenous kin who did the most outstanding form of revolutions across Turtle Island with what we saw during the invasions in Wet'suwet'en. Another thing that I want to note, and this is a small note because I saw this yesterday during the AMS assembly, the Palestinian movement cannot co-opt any other movement. I cannot hear anyone here saying Palestinian lives matter. We are not going to steal more from the Black community than our communities already have, okay? We are not stealing and we are not co-opting that. We have our own statements. We could say free Palestine. We could say ongoing Nakba, ongoing resistance. We do not say Palestinian lives matter, because that is not ours to take. And then lastly, the last question that I had is the importance of fighting for Palestinian rights on campus as student activists. And forgive me, I'm just going to take a sip of water. I've been a part of SPHR for the past 4 years now, and I haven't even endured some of the things that other student alum have endured. SPHR has endured some of the worst harassment at this university, and no one has ever spoken out about it in a way that was sufficient, in a way that protected the students who spoke out and who risked everything. We had Palestinians who risked their status. Some students are not citizens, and risk their status to speak out on Palestinian human rights at this university. We experienced surveillance. People would rip down our posters within seconds of us putting them up for our events. We experienced heckling at our events towards our speakers. We experienced doxing, terrorist allegations just this year that nobody really spoke out about. And we reached out to faculty. We reached out to other clubs. And maybe a handful signed our statement. There was lack of support from the Human Rights Office, a lack of support obviously from the admin and the AMS, and barely anyone else within the community to reach out a hand to the Palestinians. Some of us, most of our crew is Muslim, being called terrorists, being called a terrorist. I just want to say that every campus is a frontier to this resistance. And if we don't hold our ground towards the narrative, if we are not strong and steadfast towards the Palestinian narrative, then we lose that frontier. And I came this close to giving up on Queens. I came this close. But yesterday, community proved me wrong. Community came through. We attended a 4-hour assembly with the AMS, and they heard our demands, and they promised things like, and I will list it right now so that we could all hold them accountable after this teach-in. They promised policy to protect Palestinian students and students who criticize Israel. They promised that they would reach out to SPHR, Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights, to provide training with compensation for their execs. They said that they would reach out to Patrick Dean and CC SPHR so that we could talk seriously about divestment from Israel. We talked about the definition, the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which we will include in our training sessions as SPHR, and that we will get a promise from the AMS not to adopt the definition of anti-Semitism, which is problematic because it includes any criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism, which we all should know, everyone here should know that is not true. We demanded them to have a commitment towards speaking seriously about divestment. And we also demanded an apology from the AMS execs for not issuing a statement when SPHR had allegations of terrorism against us this year. I want to quote what the president, Zaid Qasim, said. He said, "These are not empty words. These are not empty promises." And I want to say that because Palestinians for decades have been given empty promises from the UN, from allies. This time we can't afford your empty promises. And this time we're going to hold everyone involved accountable. Everyone here is accountable. I myself am accountable. I was born in the diaspora. I was born in Toronto. I cannot claim to know what Palestinians on the ground are going through. I cannot claim my mother's experience in the refugee camps in Lebanon. That is not an experience that I can claim myself because I did not live it. But I hear it, and I'm here, and I'm the generation, inshallah, ya Rab, I'm the generation that's going to speak out against it and not be afraid and not mince my words anymore. I've minced my words for way too long at this institution. I've been gaslit to the end of times at this institution, and I am enraged because of my love for the community, for my love for Palestinians, for the love of our culture, for the love of my mother and all that she went through, for the love of my family that's still in the camps, for my love of my community members here who are literally busting, and I'm gonna swear here, I apologize, but they're busting their asses right now to mobilize in a time that we should be allowed to mourn. And it's heartbreaking. And I barely prepared notes for today because I'm in so much pain. And yet I've been in meetings every day since I've woken up till about 5 a.m. at night, preparing, putting things together, putting documents together, preparing marshals, preparing safety teams, reaching out to elders, reaching out to community members, keeping my co-organizers sane within their own experiences of being gaslit. I've woken up every single morning sick to my stomach, and I'm begging for that pain to be removed, but it's not going to be removed until I see liberation. Until I see real commitment from all of you here. And I'm not crying for you to feel bad for me. I'm crying because I'm enraged. and I love my people. Everyone here needs to do better because my 5 years at Queen's, I only had a handful of people behind me. And I'm calling out faculty who are here too, because I felt that in some instances, the labor of Palestinian students, the labor of students who were politicized was exploited for the gain of academics at this institution. And I just want to say that there was this, I don't know exactly the person who wrote it, but I don't want to take credit for this, but Palestine is not your plaything. To every single academic, and this includes myself, because I'm a student at this university. For all of us, Palestine is not our plaything. These are not numbers. We don't play with the corpses. Our martyrs are people. This is not something that you can just write about and get a publication about. This is not something that you could just write about in your politics class and hope you can get an A+. This is my people. Anyway, I want to end off on a more hopeful note. I wasn't expecting to get that emotional, but it just happens, I think. With those demands that I listed that we had towards the AMS, the minimum that I'm asking for everyone here who's listening today who actually care, please hold them accountable this year. We can't do it without community. Send emails if you don't see statements being made. Support SPHR's efforts, email SPHR, ask how you can help, ask if you can donate, ask the PYM if you could donate. This movement has always been an underfunded one, so we could really use the funds. We could really use the funds. And then I want to say, I know that folks from PSAC and SPHR and MSGP have put together some calls to action for everyone here. I really, really, really demand that all of you look at those calls of action and answer them, because it's urgent. And like I said before, if decades from now when Palestine is free and you look back and you think I didn't do enough, shame on you. But if you do, bless you. I think I'm gonna heed to my time now. I apologize for if I went over.
So much love to you, Maysam. Dr. Ariel, if you want to take it away from here.
It's really hard to follow Lubna and Maysam, and I'm sort of resonating with emotions, both as, you know, someone who knows Maysam for many years, Lubna I'm just meeting, gratitude for PSAC and all the people who've come together for this program and other acts of solidarity. So on the one side is a human being as a person who is of Jewish North American background, who has worked perhaps not as much as I should have, but at least for the since the 1980s, as an activist, as well as an academic, although my academic work takes me in other directions. I think what I'm left with is resonating with sorrow for what continues to happen, the tragedy, the violence, the criminality that's visited upon Palestinian people inside 67 borders, outside and beyond. But also when I hear voices like Maysam's and Lubna's, also with hope of another world is possible. What I think that I can add to this, and hopefully, you know, it might be useful in some way, is to think historically about narratives and how those narratives have subverted Palestinian cause precisely because they've been harnessed by very powerful media forces, by academics and institutions, promoted by the Israeli state across the world, and are grounded on a couple of mythologies that I think that often even people who have worked in this field as activists for many years may not have had the opportunity to think about in precisely these ways. So what I'd like to do is my very minor contribution to this discussion, and I hope to have something fuller to put on the MSGP website as a sort of organizing tool, as a debating tool, as a discussion tool, as a way to call the media in its hypocrisy, grotesque imbalance, is to provide, I think, a sort of deconstruction of two animating myths, which just come forward time and again, inform the misinformed, which is the mass majority, unfortunately, of people who are influenced by or shaped by various forms of Israeli hasbara, public disinformation, which inform and uninform, systematically also the portrayal of Palestinians, of Israeli aggression in the media, especially mainstream media. So I'd like to explore those two. I'm going to share my screen right now for exploring these myths just briefly. Let's see if I can get this done. Do you have my screen? Obviously not yet.
Yes, we do. You just have to maximize your.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I think what I'd like to sort of present is just some tools, perhaps, to interrogate, undermine what I consider these two foundation myths in discussions and mass media about Palestine, Palestinian rights, and Israeli aggression, of course, continually legitimized as quote unquote Jewish self-defense, not even just Israeli, but Jewish self-defense, despite the fact that more than half of people who count themselves as Jews do not live in the state of Israel. I think first myth one, and this I remember so clearly, as a graduate student, reading the literature produced by Israelis, and many non-Israeli scholars, of course, Palestinian scholars always protested against this notion that Palestinians were not a people. They didn't have a right to a nation. They did not have a right to self-determination. And of course, it was many years of struggle under the leadership of organizations like the PLO that forced this question. But it still informs, it's a very insidious type of notion that still informs a lot of the propaganda, the anti-Palestinian propaganda, the pro-Israeli propaganda. The Palestinians were not a people before the state of Israel. They had no desire for self-government or self-improvement, and that they, along with other Arabs, only sought to sabotage the Jewish people's desire for homeland. And this, of course, sits on piles of ignorance and misinformation. But I just want to, again, provide some of these tools. And for those of you who read Arabic, you can see, here's a map, an Ottoman map with Palestine written right over it, which was used very early on in Ottoman maps, Palestine, as a sort of common terminology for this land. This land had various states of autonomy. It was not a separate nation state. There were no nation states in the Ottoman Empire, nor in many of the other large states, including the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So you didn't have specific nation states at this time in the 19th century. And on the right side, of course, you can see Jerusalem and Ottoman and Palestinian officials who were participants in rule of their lands, of their city, and of the countryside. And over the course of the 19th century, participated even more in a representative government that culminated in 1878 with the first Ottoman parliament, and then was revived in the years before World War I, sending Palestinian representatives, both Christian and Muslim, to Istanbul to participate as representatives of this area in the Ottoman parliament. So I think it's very important to know that from very early on, a very clear sense of peoplehood, participation in government, experience in all these realms that was completely ignored and washed over and negated by subsequent imperialist and Israeli historiography. In fact, a colleague, and we have this, I believe, still up on our MSGP website, a colleague has produced a book that has shown how the French and the British deliberately subverted the creation of a multi-religious constitution for Greater Syria after World War I, although the Arabs had gone over to the British side, had supported the British during World War I on condition that they would receive autonomy. They were betrayed. And as the war unfolded, they also learned that, that they had created this separate agreement with leading British Jews called the Balfour Agreement, which set into place this vague idea that would eventually become the State of Israel, of the quote unquote Jewish right to return to a homeland in their midst, where European Jews had never lived and at best perhaps visited as pilgrims or for study. The second point I want to make in terms of the myth busting is, and I agree with Maysam and Lubna, many forms of resistance, but I think what one has to really underline is that over the years, the vast majority of Palestinians, and yes, many of them are women of all different sexualities and orientations, the vast majority of resistance has been nonviolent. And it has gone on and on and on, and it has evolved in all sorts of forms. Here you see a children's march on the left under the Mandate, and on the right, the Intifada of 1987, led by Hanan Ashrawi there in the front, and other leading intellectuals, followed by scores and scores, hundreds of students who suffered unbelievable oppression. I mean, this whole period from the 67 to 82, 87, the type of oppression, demolition of homes, imprisonment, spying, expropriation of land, and any kind of arrest for any kind of suggestion that the Palestinians themselves had their own identity. I mean, in that period, I remember so clearly, if a Palestinian were to raise even separately the colors of the Palestinian flag, they could be arrested. Books were censored throughout the occupied territories. So throughout this period, in every form, many forms of peaceful resistance, of course, and justified, more militant forms of resistance. But the vast majority of resistance has always been peaceful, continues to be peaceful, and is exemplified by this very teaching and this very discussion we're having today, and the incredible work done by Palestinian students on this campus and their allies, as well as Maysam now in Toronto. Finally, if Palestinians have had it more difficult than other peoples, including peoples who've been colonized, it is precisely because of the multiple expulsions, the multiple times of ethnic cleansing that has been visited on the Palestinian people, beginning in 47 through 49, where over 700,000 Palestinians were expelled and not allowed to return. Although they very much wanted to return, they were non-combatants, and they were content to return to their farms and their homes in the cities and in the countryside. It would happen again in 67. There would be ethnic cleansing along the borders of the new state of Israel, its borders with Jordan. There would be attacks, destruction, mass murder of Palestinians on the Jordanian frontier, in Lebanon, and of course, as Lubna referenced, the horrific wars combined against the Palestinians, and in the 80s in Beirut, the assault on a modern city which destroyed much of the city, killed thousands and thousands, and also led to a horrific mass murder of Palestinians, helpless Palestinians who were under, should have been under the protection of international authorities and were responsible, and the Israelis were responsible as the occupying force, the mass murder of hundreds of Palestinian women and children in Sabra and Shatila camps. So this division, and despite this division, the scattering, the multiple forms of resistance, and the resilience to the present. And again, today, this is 2020, but 2021, we're talking about Palestinians within the 67 borders, 2 million in Gaza, over half of which are children. So attacking Gaza is in any way, shape, or form with these indiscriminate weaponry. It's very targeted at civilian targets, are acts of war, crimes against humanity. In the West Bank, as Lubna and Maysam noted, fragmented farmers who can't get to their fields. And then, of course, in Jordan, some of whom have gained, of course, Jordanian citizen, Lebanon, where they have not, Syria, Iraq, and beyond. So that's myth number one, that the Palestinians are not a people. They are a people in the early years of the, late years of the period of the Ottoman Empire. Arabs, Turks, Kurds, and many other Muslim peoples, Armenians, non-Muslim peoples, developed identities, proto-nationalist identities, and Palestinian identity has not only been there, it's closely rooted to the land, but it has, despite the odds, become stronger, clearer, and hopefully, if there's any way to salvage this horror that's happened, more united, even within and between the parts, the contiguous parts of Palestine that are separated by Israel, and of course, various forms of occupation, oppression. But the second myth, I think, is equally important to dismantle. And that is the myth that, and this is part of the IHRA, which we should really be careful and say it's the IHRA working definition. It was a definition devised that was never supposed to be used legislatively, was never supposed to be used on campus. It was basically something that statisticians wanted to use for assembling some sort of forms of data. And it was not consecrated in any way, nor did it have a thorough vetting by scholars, historians, etc. But Hasbara and organizations have mobilized, instrumentalized, that weaponized that working definition to their own devices to shut down criticism of the state of Israel. But along with this, even that definition is so intensely Eurocentric from the perspective of Jews. Much of the Jewish community is not in Western Europe. Most of the Jewish community was actually in Europe, was in Eastern Europe at the time of World War II. The vast majority of Jews lived in the eastern part. And then there were Jewish communities across the Muslim world and beyond. So this notion that Jews deserved Palestine that was made by Jewish nationalists, political Zionists, was something, and eventually decided to address Palestine itself rather than another colonized area of the world, which they hoped to subtract from British rule, was something that was specifically oriented toward a Jewish experience. And this notion that all Jews, which again was incorrect even in Europe, wanted political Zionism, that is a Jewish nation state, was also false, because Orthodox Jews, many Orthodox Jews, immediately rejected this. They would travel to Jerusalem, to Palestine, and interestingly enough, throughout the early modern period, the medieval period, the symbol for Jews of Palestine was the Al-Aqsa Mosque, when they symbolized Judaism. So their Jerusalem was actually linked to a Muslim-ruled Palestine. And they would go there to study, they would leave, they would go there in exile, some of them medieval and later. So there was no consensus whatsoever about political Zionism, Jewish nationalism of different stripes. And along with that, the notion, and again, this very Eurocentric notion based on settler colonialism, the same ideologies and legitimation, John Locke, which was used against the indigenous populations of Turtle Island, that they possessed a superior right to land by virtue of technology and harder work and their ability to work harder and to make, in the words of many Israeli apologists, make the desert bloom, was also part of this package of justification. Of course, after World War II, the Holocaust the Shoah became one of the mainstays of this compensation, supposedly. So the Arabs and the Palestinians specifically are supposed to compensate European Jews for the oppression of the Germans and Nazism. So I think what we have to think about here too is, again, this Eurocentric view. And what's it based on? And this is something I teach about and I talk about a lot in my own research. It's based on the fact that European Jews experienced repeatedly ethno-religious cleansing from the 13th century onward. 1492, infamously kicked out of Spain, where they had lived for 1,000 years or more. But as you see here in the map, where are they going? They're either going to Eastern Europe, or the vast majority, especially those who were expelled from Spain, which was one of the largest groups of Jews, the Sephardim in Europe, they went to Muslim lands. So this experience was not universal. And it certainly was not the experience that Jews had in many Muslim lands. I'm not saying all, but in the largest Muslim states, this was not the case. And in this land from 1492 onward, or really from the early 16th century onward, communities flourished in different cities beyond Jerusalem. In fact, the largest population of Jews in the Ottoman Empire, the largest concentration, was in what is today Greece, in Thessalonica. It was famous. It was called the Jerusalem of the Ottoman Empire, of the West. And it had a flourishing Sephardic Jewish community that was there until the early 20th century, and then whose last survivors after Greece became a nation state were destroyed and killed in concentration camps. So I just, again, want to show you some pictures here of, and I don't know whether you can see the picture on the very far side because I've actually got this set up here. Starting here is 1893, a synagogue in Jerusalem. And Arab Jews note that they were very much integrated into the fabric of Palestinian society. They had a great deal of mutuality, a great deal of support in neighborhoods in Jerusalem. And of course, all that would change with the coming of European Jews in very large numbers. Here are Sephardic Jews, probably either in Izmir or in Thessaloniki, what is today Thessaloniki, what was called Salonika. And here, and I'm sorry if it's covered because I have not moved into the screen mode, is actually Miss Baghdad, 1947. Jewish Miss Baghdad, who happened to win the contest over everyone else, 1947. So Jewish lives in the Ottoman Empire and Arab lands were decidedly different. And to make these generalizations about the experiences in Europe is false, and I think really has to be underlined. And many Mizrahi Arab Jews make that point very clearly. So what ended up producing and making for a successful political movement among European Jews was not the ideology itself. As I said, European Jews were very divided over this. religious and non-religious, assimilated, not assimilated. They had very different opinions about Jewish nationalism, about forming a Jewish nation state. If anything, they wanted to be part of the emergence of states in which citizenship was taken seriously, where they had a political voice, and they would have remained had it not been for Nazism. And Nazism changed everything for them in one fell swoop. And this is something that, again, is great pain to think about, that those people who had experienced this kind of loss of civil rights and citizenship could then pass a law like the 2018 law in Israel, which strips more than 20% of people who hold Israeli citizenship of equal rights. They never had formally equal rights, but actually legislates it. Just it's like Nuremberg. It's so painful to think about. But in any event, this happened. And these Jews, as they lost rights, as they were subject to lynching and pogroms, as Nazism and German armies expanded into other areas and brought with them their exterminatory and genocidal programs, these Jews wanted to leave. They had to leave. They were not Zionists. And this should be underlined. But where could they go? So there are two parts to this question that I think always has to be emphasized. Yes, the Nazis. Yes, the Nazis. Yes, the Holocaust. But why weren't refugees? We have to ask that then and now, when we have huge amounts of refugee populations, well beyond, of course, the Palestinians who have are the oldest unresolved refugee question in the world. But why are we not admitting people fleeing from violence, from oppression? But in 1939, that question was asked of the American public, and they said no. 61% of them said no, don't admit them, even though there was actually a quota of 10,000 reserved for Germans. They never filled that quota. Canada admitted even fewer during this whole period. And so there are two parts of this. Yes, the Holocaust, but the second part was immigration, and racist immigration that prevented Jews from going to countries which were economically better off, that could absorb them in the 1930s, which happened to be, of course, the Depression. And so instead of going to the countries where they would like to go, they ended up going to Palestine in the 30s, which provoked a political crisis in Palestine, in mandatory Palestine itself, as Palestinian Christians and Muslims saw this complete lack of control. They had been duped by the British, they had been deceived, and now they were being forced to admit people in a tiny country with a very small economy that they couldn't support, and who had, as they were told time and again, a very political agenda that ran directly against their own aspirations for self-rule and self-determination. And this would provoke the first real organized militant insurrection from 36 to 39 that was brutally repressed by the British, by collective punishment, by hangings, by killing. They put everything into Palestine at this time. And if you talk to people, because they knew there was a war looming in Europe and they could not afford to have Palestine unstable. And they repressed and, to the best of their ability, wiped out the armed, organized Palestinian struggle during this time, which was set off not by anti-Jewishness, but by the lack of control that Palestinians had over their fates, over their future. They knew, they saw what was going on. And it's in this time period, of course, that the organizers, and I think this is something to debate and discuss at different points. And also, I mean, at this point, I think there's no question that at least since Oslo, there has never been a serious thought of an independent Palestinian state with any meaningful notion of a state that's sovereign over their borders, that has its own army, that has territorial integrity. I don't think there's any question, any part of the Israeli political mainstream society that would allow that ever. So, I mean, that's completely disingenuous, the idea that they think there's going to be a two-state as a state solution. But in this period of flux, before the war, before the extent of the Holocaust was known, I think there was a great deal of variety. Palestinians and Jews cooperated in different parties, especially the Communist Party, and other parties where Jewish immigrants saw Palestinians as their equals and treated them as such. On the far end of the spectrum, it was the revisionists here portrayed Jabotinsky, his colleagues, which included Menachem Begin, who would later become prime minister under the very same Likud party, which of course Benjamin Netanyahu is the leader of now, and who would blow up the King David Hotel, organize the destruction of the King David Hotel, in which Jews, Palestinians, and British were killed. 92 of them were murdered, who very much a terrorist by definition in this period. And of course, would organize some of the worst atrocities committed against Palestinian civilians during the period of the expulsions in 47 through 49, which included destruction of whole villages, murder of villagers, and rapes, as Benny Morris tells us. And of course, Palestinian memory is even more valid on the score than Israeli archives. So the end result, I think, is on the one hand, these two myths, and added to this notion that Israel somehow made it on its own with no help from anyone else. And I will put up a link to this article because I think it's very interesting. A colleague here in the economics department actually did a calculation on what he estimated to be the real value of Palestinian properties that were expropriated from people who hoped they would return. And he calculated that their total value in 1950 was actually equivalent to the entirety of Israel's net national product, meaning Israel built from the very beginning its state on the backs of Palestinian property and expropriated land, every bit of it, of course, and renaming villages and towns in the final stages of ethnic cleansing, this rewriting of the map. And you can see here, this is the UN. We can see this steady erosion of what was left of what was the Palestinian Mandate, with the expulsion of Palestinians, leaving only at this point in theory, but not actually in practice, given all the land that has been expropriated, for the wall, for checkpoints, for so-called security, for settlements. Over 500,000 Israelis now live in the West Bank. That is reduced to, at its fullest extension, 22% of the original territory that should have been divided in the best of circumstances at the UN between the smaller group of Jews and the larger group of Palestinians. So just to conclude, I think these two myths, these two foundation myths, you can see them, you can feel them in the way that the mass media treats this subject, in the inequality, in the presumptions of non-peoplehood and even non-personhood, with stories that don't even dare to name, talk about a child recovered from the rubble of Gaza, but never saying Gaza, because that would point the finger at Israel and dispute all these myths of greatness and goodness and self-justification and deserving. And this media way of treating is so insidious, both within Israel, as Gideon Levy says, that allows most Israelis to live in a bubble, never think about, never even see the image of what is happening to Palestinians, which is not saying that they would change their behavior, but they don't even have, they are the government and this collusion between what is now a very transnational very concentrated media allows them to preserve this sense of innocence from this grotesque and horrific violations of human rights, but also as it influences our mass media. Here in Canada, the failure of the Canadian press to acknowledge the Human Rights Watch's report, which has, after years of not using the term, acknowledged and underlined that Israel is guilty of massive human rights violations and persecution, and that the current regime is a form of apartheid. Refused to even acknowledge that. But of course, and here I think we should be cautioned about, how much we take on this battle with the IHRA working definition, because it is also part of the Hasbara. So I think we have to find another way to contrast it. Because part of this has to do by naming assaults on Israel as anti-Semitism, creating a myth of complicity for North American Jews, an investment, a stake in preventing the myths from being destroyed. But here, as you can see, I believe, and that's my hope, along with the tremendous courage and strength and dedication and patience of Palestinian youth and Palestinians and indigenous peoples and their allies, that the Jewish community is now, at least in much greater numbers than in 1980s, starting to say, not in our name. And they're doing so in a way that is so delegitimizing, where people would like to say it's Rashida Tlaib and other new members of the so-called squad in the Democratic Party that are leading this. The fact is, it is the two Jewish senators, the newly elected senator from Georgia and good old Bernie Sanders, who are the ones to launch a condemnation of the Biden administration for basically rewarding the Israelis for these crimes against the Palestinians by giving them almost $750 million worth of military equipment, even as the bombardment of Gaza and its destruction of its people was taking place. So there are many ways in which the Hasbara continues to affect the mass media, but it has not proven fully effective to shore up what Israel depends on to some degree. It's not the only place it gets its legitimacy, because we have to remember how important Christian fundamentalism is to Zionist Christian fundamentalism is as well, and militarism and imperialism in shoring up Israel's position and sustaining these myths. But in terms of very critical type of legitimacy, it's failing. And my hope in the midst of this tragedy is that more of us will be united, there will be more solidarity and increasing solidarity between Jews, diaspora, and elsewhere with Palestinian people, and that we can turn to some degree these tragedies from which all of us, but especially those who are in the region and who have relatives in the region and have witnessed this and are reeling from these horrific injustices and violence, that together that we can think of another world in which the siege of Gaza must be lifted, and in which some real representation of the Palestinian people can define and enact their future, and a future of prosperity and peace from which the entire Middle East and the world will benefit. Thank you.
Dr. Ariel Salzmann, thank you very much for your presentation. it's always amazing to listen to you. I mean, the kind of details you kind of include in your presentations, you know, the historical context you give, and the kind of nuanced approach you have with all the clarity, you know, like in place. Thank you very much for sharing it with us. And thank you, Lubna Taha and Maysam, you know, like they were incredible, you know, like powerful speeches as well. So like Rohit Revi at the beginning of the presentation, I think made a statement about PSAC 901. He will be the person of contact for any harassment. But I just want to also reiterate our position on this. From the start of the, let's say, mass revolt, we can call it maybe mass revolt now, right? You know, when you think of the 13,000 people in Toronto, in many cities, on Turtle Island here, and in other countries, and on Tuesday, the strike that happened, which really hurt, I think, Israeli economy in terms of construction, public transportation, cleaning. It is said that only 150 workers went to work there. It was a success, and so this wave shows us that the tide is turning, and that's what gives us hope. And maybe especially in my sons and, you know, Lubna's here representation, we see definitely a new youth movement, you know, emerging, and it's really hopeful. As PSAC 901, we also encouraged Kingston District Labour Council to issue a statement of condemnation of Israel and to ask Canadian state to stop having free arms trade deals with Israel. And it was a success. And we heard yesterday Hamilton District Labour Council did the same. And today there was an event just, you know, a couple of hours before our event, Labor for Palestine, you know, like just the unions trying to come together, recognizing it as an issue of labor, and the issue of exploitation and oppression cannot be separated from each other. Personally, I'm from Turkey, and I also know that in addition to big imperial support that the US has in terms of arms supports and everything, it has the backing of, unfortunately, the despotic and, you know, regimes in the Middle East, right? So when we think of Egypt and the political leadership there, when we think of Saudi Arabia, when we think of other despotic, you know, like politicians supporting Israel, we know the movement itself should not be within Israel only. It should really spread across the Middle East so that liberation can mean liberation against imperialist forces and against the regional dictators and, you know, like oppressive regimes as a whole. Having said that, you know, now we think we should open the floor, you know, to discussion. We do not have a lot of time, but we can, I think, extend the meeting for another, you know, like 10 or 15 minutes. Rather than getting, you know, comments and questions one by one in conversation with the speakers, I will just invite to write your questions in chat, or you can, you know, it doesn't have to be a question. You can also make some comments, and then we will give a couple of minutes to each speaker to respond to the questions and to make their closing remarks. So anyone who would like to speak, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. I was on.
Sorry. Yeah. Did you raise your hand? Yeah.
I wasn't sure how to.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Hi. Thank you so much for organizing this event. I have a question for Dr. Salzmann. I'm a graduate student at Queen's. And for one of my courses, I'm reading a book called The Right to Maim by Jasbir Kapoor. I was wondering if Dr. Salzmann, if you could lend me some of your thoughts. I have to write a response on it. And Dr. Salzmann, I was wondering if you could lend me some of your thoughts on that book if you've read it.
I actually haven't read it, so you're going to have to give me, I mean, if you want to contact me offline and just send me a little synopsis, I can look at a review or something.
Okay.
Which, this is for political science?
This is the KH869, The Body and Social Theory by Samantha King.
Oh, Sammy, okay.
Yes. I'm just taking her course right now, and I'm reading that book, and I just found it so relevant given the time and what's going on.
Well, I'm glad you brought the book to my attention, because I definitely look at it, and Sammy King is a great professor and great progressive. So, you know, I'm sure she's given you some interesting reading material, and I'm happy to share it. I'm happy to learn.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have read it if you wanted to bounce ideas off me.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this. And maybe just there is a reminder, you know, like it's good to maybe to take note of the questions that you receive, and then, you know, give some response in the end. There is one question that I will read now. It is not addressed to a particular person, but you can take note of that. One of the attendees asks, you know, I am finding it hard to talk with Jews who want to make the argument about Israel defending itself from Hamas. How do we address this question? So this is one of the questions. And I can see Amel, you know, raising hand. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Hi, if it's okay, I'll just leave my camera off for now, just to ask my question. Okay, thanks. First off, thank you guys so much for the event. Dr. Salzmann, Lubna, and Maysam, I really appreciate all of your remarks. I actually have, I think anyone could answer this question potentially, but it is related to something Dr. Salzmann said. You also mentioned it, I think, on a podcast the other day. You mentioned that Palestinian resistance this time around seems to be more unified, or more sort of on the same stream in different parts of Palestine and occupied Palestine than it has before. And I'm just wondering if you could expand on that. Why do you think that is this time around? And what, if you think there's any significance in how events might play out because of that? Thanks.
I think I'm going to pass that over to Maysam and Lubna, who have much more information on the ground. But and I think Jonan was mentioning the strike. So and what's changed. I think they can address that.
Thank you, Dr. Salzmann, for the direction. Now we have another comment and question, I think, from Murad. Yeah, can Murad, you go ahead, and you take note of, speakers can take note of the questions, you know, and then we can answer in the end. Yes, Murad, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Professor Salzmann, Maysam, and Lubna for this, for all the great discussion and information on the both historical background of the issue and the new development in the occupied territories in Palestine. You know, one can say that Second World War has not, you know, has never ended in the Middle East. So the war is ongoing in many, you know, different countries, territories, you know, and it is really, really great that the Palestinian new generation has kind of reproduced the discourse of resistance in such a great, amazing scale that we saw it last week in the rally globally, not just in Toronto, for sure. It is really, really inspiring, and you know, as a Kurd who, you know, whose land is occupied by 4 nation state in the Middle East, I think that there is lots to learn from your resilient resistance, and that is really, really amazing. The question that I have was how, you know, this new generation in the Palestine, which, you know, kind of hold and organize all these you know, new resistance, both in diaspora and back home, how it is worked toward making a kind of trans-ethnic solidarity, specifically in the Middle East, but not just restricted because of the sake of, you know, geographic interconnection, you know, and, you know, proximity of the lands there. How this new generation kind of reorganize its resistance and kind of go beyond the the ethnic kind of solidarity thing, and links its solidarity to other resistance movement in the region, especially those stateless movement who are just kind of, their land are occupied by other colonizer states, which they are not specifically, you know, kind of Western imperialism. For instance, Turkey, Iran, and, you know, Saudi Arabia and all these countries, which they are not specifically allies of the imperialism too, but they themselves are colonizers. So the question is, what can we do to make this trans-ethnic solidarity in the region? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Murat. Yeah. Now I have a question from one of the attendees. Lily asks, as a queer trans person, I am having trouble addressing the talking point that Israel apologists use commonly of, try being gay in Palestine and see what happens to you. I've heard this being referred to as pink washing. What would be an effective way of refuting this attempt to co-opt queer and trans identities? This is one of the questions. Now, Safa, I see your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Janet, there was Salma before Safa.
Ah, so I'm so sorry, so sorry. Salma, you go first. Safa will come to you later. Sorry.
Thank
Salma.
you so much. No problem. First of all, I want to thank the organizers of this. This is absolutely amazing, and I'm so I'm always in awe of like the sheer strength and like resilience of the Palestinian people. I grew up in the Middle East. I lived in Qatar, and so I was around a lot of expats all the time, and a lot of those people were Palestinian people whose grandparents and parents were pushed out of their homes in Palestine and had to move elsewhere. So please forgive me if like my question is like out of turn. I recognize that the main goal right now is Palestinian liberation, and that's the focus, and ensuring that those human rights are like met. But a lot of people discuss what the solution is, whether it be a two-state solution or a one-state solution. I was wondering what the speakers thought of that and what their view of what the solution is for that land. Obviously, everyone has different opinions, and I don't know, I know the focus is saving those Palestinian lives in Gaza and in the West Bank, but I was curious what you guys thought about the solution at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salma. Okay, now we will have Safa speak, and then I will give the floor back to the speakers in the same order of the presentation, if you don't mind. Okay, so Safa, go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you so much, Maysam, Lubna, and Ariel, for all of your perspectives. It's very important to get, come at this with different vantage points to have like a full, well-rounded perspective. My question is for all of you, but it was inspired by something that Maysam said. Maysam, your words yesterday at the AMS Assembly and today stuck with me when you said, inshallah, inshallah, when Palestine is free. Looking back, will you be, looking back and thinking, did I do enough? Thinking like, did I do enough? And maybe even feeling shameful for not doing that. Those words really stuck with me. So my question is, what are tangible and actionable things that we can do to support you, the people who are doing the labor, who are exposed to harmful and detrimental attacks? So what are things that we can do beyond signing petitions, donating, and participating in protests, which I think are things that all of us need to do. But if if we want to do more to actually support and help you in a tangible way, that's really what I want to know, because honestly, the past few days, just sharing things on my Twitter, on my Instagram, it just feels like it doesn't feel like anything at all. So yeah, that's my question.
Okay. Thank you very much. Because also the time restrictions, I'm not going to call, like another round of questions now. With the same order. Lubna, I didn't direct the questions to specific people. Maybe multiple people can make comments on the same question, I believe. Okay. Yeah, Lubna, go ahead.
Okay, so the first question, I believe it was about why is it different now? Why the organization is different now? Well, it is important to note that the Israeli state managed to create division among Palestinians in Palestine. And these divisions are actually real divisions. So we don't even have physical access to each other. I grew up in the West Bank. I cannot go to Gaza. It's illegal for me to go to Gaza, and I would want to have permission in order to go to Jerusalem or to 1948 land, and I was constantly denied under security threat. I don't know why I am a security threat. But anyways, I think while we Palestinians in Palestine live completely different realities, of course in Gaza, it's the siege, and of course Gaza is the biggest open air prison in the world and the most densely populated area, the highest numbers of unemployment among youth. Whereas in Palestinians who are also Israeli citizens, they live basically in ghettos. They are treated as not even second class citizens, maybe third or fourth class citizens. And it is a law that Israel have by claiming that it is only a state for Jewish people and completely ignoring the 20% Palestinians who are also Israeli citizens. And these people were also subjected to police brutality, very similar, I would say, to the police brutality in the United States. I mean, police in the United States is trained in Israel by Israeli army. So, this link is already established. And of course, in the West Bank, it is, even though it's not besieged or it's not ghettos, it is also like the people there are subjected to multiple and different kinds of violence and and different forms of settler colonialism, always subjected to checkpoints. So even though and of course in Jerusalem, it's also a different story, because Palestinians in Jerusalem are not Israeli citizens, but they are permanent residents. So if a Palestinian decided to go abroad for 2 years to study, more than 2 years to study abroad, they would lose their right to go back to their own house and to their own hometown. So even though we are legally classified differently and we are faced with different challenges, we are all facing challenges, and all these challenges are enforced by Israeli settler colonialism, whatever form it took. So before we didn't have this one unity among Palestinians, and it has to do with these facts, with these physical barriers that we have among each other. But now I think also largely maybe because of the social media and not completely relying on formal media like television or radio, we are seeing this unity again, and all these borders are being dismantled in a way or in another. Of course, we want these actual borders to be dismantled because it is painful. It is so painful. Whenever I go back to Palestine to visit my parents, I have to go through limitless checkpoints and security and border patrols just to be there. And of course, I'm not allowed to even use the Israeli airport. I have to fly to Jordan and then to go through the Jordanian-Palestinian borders, and then I can go to see my parents. But all like oppression, in a way, in different sense or in different ways and forms it is oppression. And when people face oppression, they have to resist. And this is the only natural result of oppression. And that's why I think for people who are claiming that Israel have to the right to security or to defend itself, Israel will never be safe unless Palestinians are safe first. And it's doing all what it can so that Palestinians do not have that right, that human right. So I think now this conversation is growing, and it's part of why the growing unity among Palestinians, not just inside historic Palestine, but also Palestinians in the diaspora. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw that, but once the escalation started to happen, even Jordanians started to walk towards the Palestinian borders. Lebanese did the same, and Syrians started to walk towards the Golan Heights, which is an occupied Syrian territory. As for the trans-ethnic solidarity that we are experiencing it today, I think as a curator and as an art writer, I think art can play a huge role in that. And while media and academia can be complicit and completely exhausted with this anti-Semitism discourse, arts and artists can go beyond that. And I think Palestinian artists has far been very progressive in that. I mean, we as Palestinians, one of my main topics of research is the issue of Palestinian archives, because over and over and over and over again, Israel has confiscated, looted Palestinian archives. And that's why now they have more than 2 million pictures that were looted from Palestinian archives in Beirut, in the West Bank, in houses, from the Gaza Strip, or even films. All these forms of art that have something to say and actually did say something are still subjected to this kind of violence, but at the same time they managed to do something. So I really think art can really be used in such discourse. As for the question about the pink washing, of course, one strategy that Israel has long been using is that it's a gay-friendly state. While this is not true, it is definitely not true, because maybe it is true in big cities like Tel Aviv. It's not true in smaller or more conservative Jewish communities in Jerusalem, for example. And in Palestine, we don't have systematic or illegal kind of oppression against gay or the LGBT community. While it is still socially sensitive topic, but you could never see any form of aggression in Palestine against this community. It is, after all, a conservative kind of society, but it is also a very open society to new ideas and to new kind of new ways of learning. And I really think that as artists, as curators, we have that mission to actually bring this conversation forward more and more. And this is not true just in Palestine. I think it is also true even here in Canada and in the United States. So it's not true that Israel is gay-friendly, and it's definitely not true that Israel is friendly towards Palestinian gays and lesbians or the LGBT community, the Palestinian LGBT community, because the Palestinian LGBT community is as oppressed as the overall community. So this is one point. As for the one state or two state solution, I know this is a bit like, I mean, Israel has been creating a no solution status quo, where it managed to isolate Gaza, to isolate the Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, isolate the Palestinians in Jerusalem, and of course, exhaust and isolate also the Palestinians in the West Bank. And while the West Bank has been the land has been looted to create more and more Israeli settlements, illegal settlements by UN, as declared by the UN and several international organizations. It's also creating this more and more difficult to create a Palestinian state. I think most Palestinians also do think that a solution would be a one-state solution where Palestinians and Jews and Israeli Jews can be treated equally and can be represented equally in the system. Of course, Israel, I really don't think Israel would accept that, especially that the Palestinian population is growing way more rapidly than the Israeli population, and soon enough, it's not like this idea of a Jewish state is going to collapse. I mean, it's not, it's already collapsing, but yeah, as I think I speak for most Palestinians when I said we would support one state solution where all people are treated equally, regarding of their religion or ethnicity or their origins. Yeah, so this is regarding that.
Yeah, maybe if we wrap up, I'm sure there are a lot of points that you want to make, but maybe
I think this is it. I'm gonna leave the last question about what can be done here. I think Maysam would be the best to answer that question. So yeah.
Thanks a lot, Lubna. Thanks a lot for all the responses. Maysam, now it's the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Shannon, and thank you, Lubna. I want to start with just like explaining what the right to name is for folks who may not know. I brought out my Palestine notebook with notes that I took throughout my undergrad on readings that I did. So basically, the right to name is a tactic that the IOF has implemented to debilitate Palestinians, especially Palestinians in Gaza, to make a population of people who are, alive, to keep their numbers of casualties low so that it looks better on an international scale for their narrative, so on and so forth, while still causing immense injury to the bodies of Palestinians to keep them tame and make them less likely to resist. So it's a strategy that is used to help with damage control for the state of Israel and for their narrative. And I would recommend that if folks here have not read that book, to please read it. It is very important to understand the ways in which Gaza has been very much suffocated and how the infrastructure was designed in a deliberate way to do that to people in Gaza, and to maim the population in a way that is under control according to the settler-colonial state of Israel. I guess the next question that I wanted to attempt to answer is Murad's question about transnational or trans-ethnic solidarity. One thing I want to mention, I don't know if it was mentioned today, but I'm sure folks should know this, is that our oppressors have learned from each other, right? They've studied, they've taken notes from each other. And I mean this like literally. The Zionist colonizers studied apartheid South Africa and settler colonialism in South Africa. In addition, they studied the Indian Act and reserve systems that we saw across Turtle Island. And so to that I say, and I think a lot of the youth in my generation are starting to recognize how joint struggle work, and that we use joint struggle to transcend beyond solidarity discourses in an internal, in our internal movement for a reason. And that's because our struggles are united because of that reason, right? Because our oppressors have taken notes from each other, so that, meaning that we, as the colonized, as the oppressed, as whatever, not to, you know, make us not nuanced beings in that binary, but that means we have to stick together. We have to learn from each other. And I think a lot of people, a lot of young Palestinians in my generation are learning the importance of joint struggle work, because collective liberation doesn't come without the liberation of Kurdistan, without the liberation of Kashmir, without the liberation of Palestine, Gaza, all of these places that have been occupied, and Turtle Island, right? So when I think about liberation, I think about that collective global liberation, and that's going to come into my answer for solutions. On the note of pinkwashing, this is also a term that was coined by Jasbir Poor. Pinkwashing is an attempt, as Lubna touched on, for the state of Israel, for many settler colonial states, Canada does this too, to deter any criticism of their state by making them sound more like a democratic, queer-friendly environment and place to be in. And pinkwashing is deeply, deeply rooted in Islamophobia and racism that claims that Palestinians and Arabs are too, quote unquote, barbaric, and too, all of those colonial and violent terms, to understand and appreciate people, queer folks, queer Palestinians, because queer Palestinians exist, and there are many, many organizations within Palestine and within the diaspora who do that work, and we can link that for you folks after this teach-in. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight the roots of pinkwashing. And then to solutions, I'm gonna be real and upfront. I am very much anti-status, okay? I don't believe in state formations. I don't believe that should be how the future of our liberation looks like. Borders are colonial. We know that from scholars, indigenous scholars across the globe who've written about this. I do agree, though, that a step to that direction of being anti-status and breaking state formations and nation states has to go through the first step would be a one state, and would be the dismantling of the apartheid regime, the apartheid policies, the dismantling of the checkpoint, the wall, the racism in education systems for Palestinians, things like that need to be taken out first. That's the first step, right? Before we could get to the true work of what decolonization is, right? And I'm not saying decolonization in a way that, you know, we as people in academia have co-opted it, but I mean in a way that really dismantles colonial structures and the heart of the settler-colonial project and Zionism. I do want to mention briefly that Zionism at its core is extremely anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, obviously Islamophobic, and all of these things, because Zionist colonizers actually studied racial hierarchies and of folks, of systems in South Africa, and those folks told Zionist colonizers to take on the racial hierarchy of you know, Blacks versus Black folk versus white, etc., and apply that to Palestinians, even though obviously there's a difference there, but that racial hierarchy was inspired by like explicit anti-Blackness. So I just want to make that clear. An extreme anti-Indigenous sentiment, which claims for that Palestinians were not on the land before the creation of Israel, right? That quote that we hear often about Israel being a home for those without a state, for what is it? Sorry, a land for people for people without a land. Sorry, I'm tripping up on my words. I'm exhausted. But yes, I just wanted to say that on the note of solutions, and then quickly on the note of tangible and actionable things that folks can do beyond donating and things like that. I do want to say, though, there is a lot of strength in sharing on social media. We've been extremely censored on social media, so any chance to share the narrative is something that is valuable to the movement. So please don't feel bad about yourself if that's what you've been trying to do. But some specific things I could say is, if you are, and particularly I'm talking about Arab youth, join the movement, learn how to organize, learn how to mobilize yourself, learn how to mobilize others. Places like the Palestinian Youth Movement, once again, I'm going to say this, are open to non-Palestinian Arabs. The organization, we train young organizers, we share our philosophy, we share our political ethics with each other. That's all a part of the process of joining. And so I would say if you can learn those skills, they're extremely needed. But then again, I do want to highlight the importance of diverse strategies of resistance, and that means in every realm of society. So if you're a teacher, learning how to bring this into curriculum, if you're a lawyer, learning how to speak on international law, but beyond just international law, and view the politic around settler colonialism. If you're an academic or a faculty at Queen's, one of the biggest tangible recommendations that I would have for you folks is to create, well, actually someone on SPHR actually brought this up, and I just want to give full credits to them, is to create a network of folks who support the Palestinian struggle and are able to mentor and help students who are just coming into Queen's to know how to mobilize and learn how to talk about the issue. Because the thing about student organizing is that there's a high turnover. So every 4 years, every 5 years, whatever, we're graduating, we're leaving. So by the time our students are well trained and well versed, they graduate and then the next come in. And so we really need a permanent force of folks who are still at the institution. And I'm talking about specifically Queen's because it's not just faculty, there's PhD students who have been there for years. You folks band together and support students who, like myself in my second year, did not know what I was doing. Support us, mentor us, give us the institutional memory of Queen's. And I think that's all I'm going to say for now, because I feel like I've been talking for a while.
No, thank you very much, Maysam. It was great as usual. Thanks both to you and Lubna. So Dr. Ariel Salzmann, I'm giving the final.
Well, I don't want the final word, but I just to reiterate, I'm awed by the Lubna and Maysam. They're doing great work and have said, I think, everything right. But the one question perhaps that remains is, how do you counter these ridiculous claims that Israel has a right to defend itself against Hamas? And I think that has to go right to the fact that Israel is the occupying power. Israel cannot defend its colonialism. It is actually responsible for protecting the population under its control. And this right to maim, by the way, is also part of this other philosophy or policy of the Israeli military, which is called mow the lawn, which is to lop off generations of Palestinian leadership, very deliberate attempts to maintain control and to make sure through targeted assassinations and everything else. Without, basically decapitating leadership, literally. So, I mean, this, and the fact is that any assault on Gaza is a war crime. Gaza is 2 million people, half of which are children. There is no way to, even with the most sophisticated weaponry, which Israel claims to have, there is no way to avoid civilian casualties. And it's very obvious that in all, even possessing this and possessing a formidable defensive array of defense, which basically knocks out 90% of all Qassam rockets that may come into Israeli airspace. Even with that, Israel is deliberately targeting Palestinian civilians and civilian infrastructure. So this is absolute ludicrousy. It's just ridiculous. It has no such right under any legal form, and every, assault, aerial assaults it makes on Gaza, especially the way these are targeted, also the international press, are clearly crimes of war, and go in violation of the Geneva Conventions and many other international legal regimes. So it's just an absurd claim that unfortunately is given credence by powerful interests and states like the United States and of course Canada and whoever else continues to support these criminal acts by financing or by silence. So that is my concluding remarks, unless anyone wants to follow up.
Thank you very much. Now, Prerna, it's over to you as the moderator. Thanks everyone for answering the questions. It was awesome.
Thank you so much for engaging, and thank you so much for all of you to attend this. And I'm just going to take your direction beyond the chat. Just look at the chat. There is a template that we've prepared for sending to your departments if you're a Queen's student. And our link tree is on our PSAC page, and also on the event in which we must have registered. And please contact me or Arman Punja from SPHR for perhaps creating a collective here in Kingston to talk more and do real material action in Kingston in relation to Palestinian rights, perhaps organize more events. As the equity officer for PSCC 901, and I speak for the entire PSCC 901 executive, that we will always stand by Palestinian students on campus. We will hold space for you in all and every way possible. And I'm from mainland India, and that is an ally with Israel, which occupies Kashmir, is also a homo-Hindu nationalist country, which is also Islamophobic. So I have learned a lot in terms of the need for transnational solidarities today, and I'm sure all of you have learned so much today, and thank you so much. Have a good evening, and solidarity forever.
It was great.
Masalam.